Second part now, continuing with photosynthesis. We started talking about the two different parts. We have the light reaction, and that occurs in the thycoids, those little stacks. And then we got the second part, the Calvin cycle. Like I said, they used to call that the dark cycle, but it's really, that doesn't represent it well. So now they call it the Calvin cycle. He's probably the guy that figured that out. But that happens in the stroma, the fluid, okay? This is where the sugar is formed from the carbon dioxide, and they use ATP and another energy molecule, NADPH, okay? So the Calvin cycle begins by fixing carbon, taking that carbon and incorporating it into the organic molecules. So you're going to take CO2 and you're going to add some hydrogen, some more carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and you're going to end up with glucose. Okay, so this is where it happens in the Calvin cycle. So the first part is what absorbs the energy, and then the energy is put into the Calvin cycle along with carbon dioxide, and then we start getting our glucose. Okay, so here's the thycoid, the little stacks. Each one of these is a stack. The whole thing is called a grana. Okay, so we got these stacks, and we got light coming in, sunlight and some water, and they're producing, these energies are ATP and NADP plus. So these are energy sources, okay? So this is all going on in the chloroplast. Okay, then they go out, the ATP and the NADPH, into the fluid, the stroma, okay? So this is the light reaction. The first part is just getting that energy ready and releasing some O2. Then it goes into the Calvin cycle, okay? The CO2 goes into the Calvin cycle, and we also have these energy forms. They're going actually back and forth between them. But this is where we're going to get our organic molecule, our sugar, our food, okay? So the light reaction is where we absorb the energy so that we can send it over here, and then this is where we actually make that glucose, okay? I hope that makes sense to you guys. Okay, the light reaction then converts solar energy from the sun to chemical energy. And it converts ATP to NADPH. Again, it's like an ATP. So the chloroplasts are like little solar cells, okay? They're little chemical factories that take in carbon dioxide, sunlight, and water and end up producing organic molecules, glucose, and oxygen, okay? The thycoids, the stacks, they transform that light energy from the sun into our ATP, our light energy sources, our chemical sources, okay? So that's the light energy, okay? Well, now we don't have just chlorophyll, okay? We need sometimes to absorb more parts of the light. So we have pigments, photosynthetic pigments, okay? They absorb visible light. Visible light is a small part of the electromagnetic spectrum that we can see. If you want to know the colors, orders, it's like the rainbow. Remember Roy G. Biv? Okay, so they have different pigments that absorb different wavelengths. Plants are in different regions. They have different areas. They have different colors in their leaves. Okay, so they're not just green. Okay, the wavelengths that's not absorbed. Okay, so the sunlight comes in. If it's not absorbed, it's reflected, and that's actually the color that we see. Okay, so there's more than just chlorophyll. Okay, they appear green because the chlorophyll reflects green light. Okay, if you want to put on a color filter, you'll see a different color coming off. But the reason why plants look green is the chlorophyll reflects the green light when sunlight hits it. Okay, not all the colors of the rainbow, if you want to call it, are absorbed. So the ones that are reflected are what gives it its color. Okay, so again, we have the light come in, and then it hits some of it is absorbed. Okay, these colors are absorbed. This color is not. And that's why they look green to us. Okay, they're reflected out. That's the color that isn't absorbed. So if a color isn't absorbed, it's reflected, and that's what gives things. Like my shirt right now is absorbed certain colors, but it's reflecting blue, and that's why it looks like it's blue. Okay, so chlorophyll A is the main one. That's the main photosynthetic pigment. That's the big one, okay? That's the big green one, okay? But there's other ones. There's chlorophyll B. And what it does is if you have these accessory pigments, they allow for more energy, okay? So they can broaden the spectrum. They can absorb more energy if they have more pigments, okay? The difference in the absorbance spectrum between A and B is because there's slight differences between the pigment molecules, okay? We're not going to spend any time talking about that. Just know that there's two kinds of chlorophyll. A is the main one, but B is there too to help out. So basically it helps so it absorbs more energy, okay? And then we have accessory ones. I mean, sometimes you have, if you look at plant leaves, there's a little red in there, or there's a little orange in there, or yellow, you know, there's different colors in there. And I'm not talking about like leaves when they change in the fall, okay? Those colors are actually there. They're just covered up by the green. But we have other ones, and they're called carotenoids. Keratin would be orange. Okay, obviously carrots have a lot of keratin. Okay, they absorb excessive light, so they make sure that the chlorophyll doesn't get damaged. Because if they get too much light, you can actually start to break the chlorophyll down, and we don't want that to happen. So these other guys will step in and say, yeah, hit me with it. I'll take care of it. Okay, so their carotenoids are kind of like sunscreen for plants. They get the energy, they get the sunlight they need, but they don't get too much because we don't want to damage the chlorophyll because then the plant can't produce. So we have other accessory pigments, they're called, and what they do is absorb light to protect the chlorophyll. Okay. Again, their job is to function in photoprotection. They absorb excess light that would damage the chlorophyll, would overdo the chlorophyll. So again, we have these accessory pigments, and their job, like I said, is like sunscreen. They protect the chlorophyll so it gets the light it needs, but it doesn't overdo it because we don't want to damage the chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is very important. Okay. All right. So what happens? What happens when chlorophyll gets hit by light? Okay. The pigment in chlorophyll absorbs the light, and what it does is it goes from, if you remember, electrons, you know, they go in their little orbits. When you add energy to them, they jump up to the next orbit. Okay, that's called excited. If you guys have ever done a flame test, you know what I'm talking about. When you put metals into a burner and they turn to different colors. Well, what's going on is electrons like to be at the lowest energy possible. But when you add energy to them, what happens is they jump up to the next level. And so they're excited, but really they don't want to be there. That's not comfortable for them. So they're unstable. So when they go back down to where they're supposed to be, okay, they give off that energy. And so then they give off photons. Photons are a light. They're little packets of light. And that gives them like when they go back down to their ground state from the excited state, they're going to have to give off that energy. If you're talking about a metal, like when you do a flame test, it's a certain color. It's a certain wavelength that gives off a certain color. So they'll get this, they call it afterglow. It's called fluorescence. Okay, so when chlorophyll gets excited, when it gets hit by light, it gives it energy. And the energy allows the electrons to jump up. They get excited. They go up to the next level, but really it's not very stable. They don't really want to be there. They want to go back home. They want to go back to their ground state. So when they go back to their ground state, they give off that energy, and this is going to be photons. This is going to be little packets of light. Okay? If it's illuminated, if you have an isolated solution of chlorophyll, it'll actually give off light and heat. It'll fluoresce. In a plant, now they're going to suck up those little photons, and then they're going to start putting them into the Calvin cycle using that energy. Okay? But you can actually, I'm trying to think of like those little glow sticks and stuff, kind of use this idea of giving off that fluorescence, giving off the light and heat. Okay. If you look at the difference between what happens in a chloroplast and what happens in a mitochondria, okay, they both generate ATP. All right. But remember, the two of them are opposite. Okay. They use different sources of energy. A chloroplast uses sunlight. Okay. Mitochondria, what do they use? They transfer it, they get energy from glucose. Okay, they take food, they take glucose and they break it down. Okay, and then they use that. When they break it down, you get energy, and that's where they get their energy from. So mitochondria transfers chemical energy from food to ATP. Chloroplasts take light energy and transfer it into chemical energy and then get ATP. So a different way of doing it, you know, kind of similar, but so the mitochondria is the one that goes through cellular respiration because we need food to get our ATP. Chloroplasts get to use sunlight. All right, and the other thing is when you're doing when you're talking about these reactions. Again, ATP and NADPH, again, that's a thing very similar, a molecule very similar to ATP in that it's energy. It's produced on the side facing the stoma. So that's where the Calvin cycle takes place. So again, the light reactions generate ATP. There's where we're going to get the energy, okay? So like in a mitochondria, before it enters there, it breaks down the glucose and we take the energy from that. Well, in a chloroplast, what happens is they take light energy from the sun, and that's where they get their energy to produce that's going to go through the cycle and give us our ATP, okay? All right, the Calvin cycle uses then the chemical energy that has been produced, okay? And what it does is it takes that energy in, okay? Like the Calvin cycle is like the citric acid cycle or the Krebs cycle, all right? And like I said, they used to call it the dark cycle, but ooh, Star Wars or something, right? No, the Calvin cycle is like the citric acid cycle. It has a bunch of enzymes that control all the steps, but what it takes that energy that was produced from the light cycle and it grabs and it uses the ATP, that energy stuff, and it takes carbon dioxide and it converts it into sugar. Okay, so again, remember in the mitochondria, we took sugar and we got our ATP and we ended up producing carbon dioxide and water. So they're just the opposite of each other. Like I said, which is a really sweet deal. They give us what we want, we give them what they want. Okay, the cycle builds sugar from smaller molecules, from carbon dioxide, from oxygen, from water, and then using the ATP and the reducing power, again, of NADPH, another form of energy, but using those, it produces our organic molecules, our sugars. Okay, so carbon enters the cycle as carbon dioxide and leaves, as they call it, glycerolaldehyde 3-phosphate. Okay, it's going to be converted. Again, that's an organic molecule. The net synthesis of this, they call it G3P. The cycle must take place 3 times. So in order for this to happen, the cycle has to go around 3 times, and then it'll get, you'll fix 3 molecules of CO2 to get this lovely molecule when you're done. So the net synthesis, to get that, it'll take in that 1 glycerol 3-phosphate, G3P. It'll put it in there, and then the cycle will go around 3 times with that. And when it's done, it fixes 3 molecules of carbon dioxide. And so you have 3 phases to the Calvin cycle. One is where it fixes the carbon, and it's catalyzed by something called Rubisco. To me, that's like something you should pick up at Starbucks in the morning. I'll have my latte and a Rubisco on the side, but it's not. It's an enzyme, okay? So first we got to fix that carbon. Then we're going to reduce it, get rid of, reduce it so that we can add our hydrogen. And then last but not least, we're going to regenerate the carbon dioxide when we're done. So we use it, but we don't use all of it. And then it accepts, and they call this RUBP. That's another enzyme. These aren't important, you guys. It's just to remember the Calvin cycle has 3 phases, and its job is to take in this energy that's produced and make our organic molecules. So this is where the sugar gets made. Okay, so the light energy is the one that has to get, the energy ready to do the actual process. They throw it into the Calvin cycle, and the Calvin cycle fixes carbon, reduces it so we can add the oxygen and the hydrogen, and then we end up with our organic molecules. Okay, so this is what it looks like. I'm going to end on here because I'm at like 14 minutes, but so light coming in, water coming in. Okay, one of the things we're going to end up with is oxygen. Great, we like that. Okay, we put our ATP and our NADPH, and you notice over here they're missing their phosphate bond. So they send them back over here so we can add that phosphate again. So this is the energy. This is what they look like after they've been used. We got to add that phosphate bond again. Okay, and here's a Calvin cycle. We take carbon dioxide in and we end up with our sugars. Okay, so these are the 2 parts, the light reaction and the Calvin cycle. And we're just about out of time, so I'm going to end right there. We have one more part and then we'll be done with chapter 10.